quite sure how many people will come to your party. So it's quite gratifying to see you all here this morning to hear our wonderful speakers. Our club has been in existence for almost 100 years, and we've met regularly over that time. The committee that has planned this symposium is in your program. John Dirks has chaired it, and the members have been Bobby Angel, Allison Lee, and Chris Rutty. The whole program was initiated by Carol Saka, who is either here already or will be coming later this morning, who chaired the committee as well for a while. The symposium would not go without sponsors, and our initial sponsor was the Associated Medical Services, and the CEO of that group is here this morning, and I'd like to introduce you to Gail Peach. Gail, if you would stand up and wave. The AMS has been very supportive of our club, not only for this symposium, but for things in the past as well, so we're deeply grateful for that. We also think that Doug Daniel of Sanofi is here. Doug, thank you for waving your hand. Our other sponsors are mentioned and will be mentioned through the course of the program. It's my pleasure now to introduce our host here at the Dell Atlanta, Dean Adelstein Brown, who has been very generous in his help for our symposium. For those of us who watch television, he's become a bit of a TV star, and all of us in Ontario are very grateful for his work with COVID. And we are very grateful for his help in sponsoring this symposium. So Dean Brown, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. So look, it's my privilege and my pleasure to welcome you here today. I know that we've got people from close by and we've got people from abroad who'll be speaking today, and I think that's great. This is what a school is supposed to do. It's supposed to bring together a bit of a scholarly community and welcome people in to engage in the type of debate and discussion and critique and reflection that is really important at this time of public health in our world today. Look, I want to say a few words about the school. It's, I think, part of my job to be the chief cheerleader for what goes on here. Insulin has had a critical role in the history of the school, and I'm looking right at Chris Ruddy, and I'm always careful when I start to talk about the history of the school because I know I will never get it as well or as good as Chris does, and he may talk to you a little bit about that. But Insulin, you think about all the different work that came out of the Connaught laboratories and other work that went on throughout the several decades that the school was in existence until the 70s, and then now hopefully starting up again with an equally sort of storied record. I'll talk about three of these bits of innovation because I think they're interesting. The first is the school during the pandemic actually piloted, evaluated, and launched, really created, virtual safe injection sites. We know that there's a harm reduction approach that can save lives if we deal with this opioid pandemic that's hit us just as this, even worse, just as this pandemic of COVID's hit us. That's work coming out of the school. Folks may not know right now, but the people providing the advice to the White House on how they rebuild trust in public health are graduates of our journalism program. It often seems surprising to folks that you have a journalism program at a school of public health, but if public health only works at the speed of trust, the ability to communicate clearly is one of the most important resources and weapons that we have in our arsenal. And I had the really distinct pleasure last week of spending an evening with our first cohort of DRPH students. We're the first school in Canada to offer DRPH. This is sort of the advanced degree for people who are really going to be public health leaders. And the really nice thing out of that whole evening was just seeing how committed all of this cohort of people were to the type of impact that we need in our health system. And hopefully 100 years from now, when this club reconvenes, there'll be a few of the graduates of that cohort who get talked about in a good way. I'm always cautious about that with history, in a good way. Look, I'll just say maybe a couple other sort of words and then leave you to a much more interesting and enjoyable day than you'll have with if I spend all the time up here. And that's things like insulin. So insulin is a game changer, right? I don't think anyone feels differently. And if you walk, and Chris, you've had roles in some of the exhibits, you walk by and you see the pictures of the kids before and after, and that sort of profound moment when people would realize they'd actually have a life. We still hope for game changers. But I think if you look at the world of today, with the degree of multimorbidity we have. That, you don't just walk around with diabetes. You're going to walk around with 3 and 4 and 5 other diseases. I've got a couple, 3 I manage. If you think about the intersection of all the social determinants of health with chronic disease, you can see that it's going to require a more complex, a more nuanced, and a more comprehensive approach to actually deal with these crises. And we want more game changers. We need more game changers like insulin, but we also need them deployed within the full range of public health activities so that we actually get the gains in health that we want to see. And with that, I think it's my pleasure now to turn over to John Dirks. I'm not going to introduce John other than to say, if you don't know who he is, that's your problem, not his. And I'll take this off. And John, turn it over to you. And welcome to the school. It's nice to have you all here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stanley. We're very happy to be here, and thank you for all your support and for your recommendations for future courses of dealing with disease and chronic disease. So I too want to thank everybody who was involved, all this committee that worked very hard to make this happen. We were delayed twice because of the pandemic, but here we are in person. There's a couple of things I want to say at the beginning before I make a tribute to Michael Bliss. Yes, we are the sponsors. We also I mentioned Boehringer and Ingelheim and Lilly, which were very involved in the insulin story at the very beginning. And I want to pay a tribute to the University of Toronto, where, as you can see, various departments, in addition to Sanofi and Novo Nordisk and AMS, various departments of the University of Toronto came forward to help us. This day is actually very propitious. It's exactly 100 years today that a meeting was held in Washington, D.C., the Association of American Physicians, and a paper was presented by McLeod, J.G.R. McLeod. And you notice that all authors of all the members of his team are listed here. They were not all in Washington. Banting and Best didn't travel because they were saving expenses for the department. But Campbell and Fletcher were the 2 initial clinicians who administered insulin at the Toronto General Hospital. And McLeod was on it, and also another graduate student, Noble, that will be discussed later on, I think particularly by James Wright. So this was the first formal announcement of the discovery of insulin and the effect of a treatment, the effect produced on diabetes by extracts of the pancreas. The article is fairly subdued. It's reserved, but it's confident. And in it, McLeod describes how they got into this. He pays tribute to Banting for the dog experiments, but being aware of the problem of proteolytic enzymes. Then he goes on to deal with the production of the pure insulin involving call-up, using the progressively more concentrated alcohol solutions. And this solution was the effective one in the first patient, really treated well. And then he went into the various rabbit experiments showing that sulfate insulin caused hypoglycemic attacks. In fact, he rolled out the large ball of wax. He mentioned the problems they had in larger production of insulin at that time, and this made an issue to be resolved. So he was confident and exact, and he discussed the 7 patients had been treated at that time. So at the end of this, he received many good comments, people saying, "We admire your work, it's brilliant." But perhaps it's worth quoting the words of Alan at that time, who was a big diabetic physician where people were on these strict diets. He said, "If, as seems to be the case, the Toronto workers have the internal secretion of the pancreas fairly free from the toxic materials, they hold unquestionable priority for one of the greatest achievements of modern medicine, and no one has the right to divide the credit with them." And later on, he did caution that this wasn't the actual final cure for diabetes, as much along the train of thought of Dr. Brown at this moment. Anyways, this was followed by a standing ovation in Washington, and it was a memorable moment exactly 100 years ago. So this is worth remembering where this stood in the whole course of history of the insulin discovery and all the names were there. Next slide. So I'm going to introduce Michael Bliss, who was the great writer of the day and left us 5 years ago, just about now. And he, without question, I'm going to identify him as kind of the fifth man in the discovery of insulin, because he finally told the story like no one had told it before. He was a friend to many of us, and talked, and was a major political writer in Canada, and then for that alone he's missed, as well as his stature in medical history. Next, please. So from the 20s to 1982, the prevailing view, including this city, was that Frederick Banting and Charles Best discovered insulin. Many buildings, fellowships, awards, other things were named after them. In 1982, Michael Bliss's book, The Discovery of Insulin, provided the persuasive argument that there were four discoverers of insulin: Banting, Best, J.G.R. MacLeod, and James Collop. In the public domain, though, Banting-Best mythology remains tenacious, and to a large extent even today. Next slide. Michael's, the first book is the one on your far right, The Discovery Insulin, with all the names, their signatures on it. And then we have on your further right the subsequent issue, and the one in black, the one today that Dr. Allison Lee has been revised and wrote an excellent preface to. Congratulations, Allison. And I included her own book, J.B. Collop, here at the bottom. Accompanying this was also a biography of Banting, in which Michael dug into Banting's character and career and the way he handled his life and his science in great depth and detail, like few others. Next slide. Bliss carried out the first careful, rigorous historical analysis of insulin research in 1921 to 23 at the University of Toronto, using Banting's lab notebooks and other new archival materials, and he reconstructed day-by-day experiments included that Banting's nocturnal great idea of tying off the pancreatic duct was not relevant, but it was indeed an inspiration for the insulin venture. The celebrated summer-fall of 1921 had not achieved anything more than previous scientists. Next, please. The key breakthrough was the preparation of an insulin product suitable for clinical treatment of type 1 diabetes. This is the work of Collop. Bliss restored MacLeod's reputation, arguing that he was key to the success of the insulin project and pinpointed the key role of Collop. Later, he critiqued the role first of Banting and then Best to rewrite history and to diminish the role of Collop and MacLeod, and thought that Collop should have joined MacLeod and Banting in receiving officially the 1923 Nobel Prize of Physiology or Medicine, for which Collop was not nominated. Next slide. So Michael Bliss did more than provide an accurate history of insulin discovery and development, because it's the way he wrote. He wrote with passion, with rigor, with vigor, catching all readers' attention in a gripping way. He became the leading medical historian of his time. Yes, the insulin story was his best, but he also elucidated stories of smallpox, Osler, Cushing, medical advances, and his own personal story of writing medical history. Next, please. So sadly, Michael passed away on May 18th, 2017, of an autoimmune vasculitic disease, which was very progressive. He was looking forward to this day, the 100th anniversary of insulin discovery, and would have been a leader in this program. We dedicate today's symposium to Michael Bliss and his family. I'm very proud to say that Elizabeth Bliss and her daughter Sally are with us today. So I would all like you to honor the memory of Michael Bliss.